The audience expected another witty, late-night exchange, a bit of banter, a few jabs, and maybe a bold tech prediction or two. That night, the stage lights glowed a little brighter, the applause a little longer, but no one knew they were seconds away from witnessing one of the most explosive moments in modern television. Elon Musk, calm and calculated, sat across from Stephen Colbert, who smiled his usual smile. But behind that smile was the tension of a man about to dive into a conversation that would unravel far beyond scripted lines and polished jokes. What happens when comedy collides with conviction? When a performer used to controlling the crowd is suddenly caught off guard by a guest who refuses to play along? Was this just another late-night bit gone off course? Or was it something deeper, something darker? Colbert opened the segment with a jab at Musk's latest acquisition, mocking the chaos it sparked and poking fun at his unpredictable decisions. The audience laughed, as they always did, but Musk didn't. He didn't even smile. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowed just slightly, as if he were peering through the joke to something more intentional. "Is it comedy?" he asked, quietly. "Or are you just scared of ideas you can't control?" The room tensed. What was supposed to be a punchline dissolved into silence. Colbert blinked, smiled, and tried to reset the tone. "Well, you've certainly made your share of unpredictable moves." But Musk didn't backpedal. He doubled down. "That's because I don't build my opinions around applause." "You do." The crowd shifted. Some still laughed nervously, unsure of where this was going. But others leaned in. There was something rare happening. Something unscripted. Colbert wasn't used to being challenged like this on his own turf. He was the conductor of the show, the orchestrator of narrative. But now, for the first time in years, the control was slipping through his fingers. Musk's tone wasn't aggressive, but it carried a surgical edge. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shout. He simply stared with a disarming calmness, dismantling assumptions one by one. He spoke about censorship disguised as humor, about groupthink cloaked in applause, about how culture had become addicted to outrage, and how comedians once known for challenging power had become the gatekeepers of it. Was he wrong? Or had the crowd just forgotten what real challenge looked like? Colbert tried to pivot, raising questions about Musk's leadership and ethics, citing headlines, controversies, polarizing tweets. But Musk wasn't rattled. "You want me to defend tweets while you sit here in a suit pretending you don't shape narratives for power?" The audience gasped. That wasn't in the script. And then something subtle cracked. Colbert's smile thinned. His voice, still sharp, lost its rhythm. The balance of power shifted, not with volume, but with silence. Musk filled the air with pauses that stung more than sound. "Do you think this is truth?" he asked. "Or is this just comfort? Laughter in place of thought?" The camera panned to the crowd. Some looked stunned. Others leaned forward, hanging on every word. Was this a debate? An ambush? Or a moment of truth that television rarely dared to host anymore? Colbert stumbled slightly, chuckling with less confidence now. "Elon, are you suggesting that comedians shouldn't question power?" Musk met the question head-on. "No, I'm saying you stopped questioning it. Now you perform for it." And there it was. A line so sharp it didn't echo. It pierced. The crowd went quiet again, not out of discomfort but contemplation. Musk had turned the mirror, not on Colbert alone, but on everyone watching. What did we laugh at? What did we ignore? And who was really writing the story behind the smiles? The segment was supposed to run 6 minutes. It had stretched to 12, and no one dared to cut it short. Not the producers, not the host, not even the network, because something had shifted, and no one knew what would happen next. The silence in the studio was not empty. It was loaded, brimming with tension, heavy with the weight of a conversation that had leapt far beyond its boundaries. Colbert, still seated upright, still clutching his note cards, was no longer the affable master of ceremonies. He was a man trying to regain his footing in a room where the terrain had shifted beneath him. Elon Musk leaned back in his chair, his hands calmly resting on the armrests, as if he were waiting, not for applause, not for validation, but for honesty. He had made his move, and now he was watching the fallout, unblinking. Colbert cleared his throat. "So you're saying," he began, choosing his words more carefully now, "that this show, my show, is part of the problem?" He smiled again, though this time it didn't reach his eyes. "That's a pretty bold accusation to make on someone else's stage." Musk didn't flinch. "That's exactly the point. It shouldn't matter whose stage it is. If truth only exists where it's convenient, then it isn't truth at all. It's theater. There was no laugh track to soften that blow. No clever piano cue to transition the moment. The audience was riveted, many staring with a mixture of shock and anticipation. And that, perhaps, was what made this moment different. It wasn't about right or left, hero or villain. It was about two men standing at the edge of their convictions, and one of them refusing to blink. Colbert shifted in his chair, tapping the cards against his knee. "All right, Elon," he said, voice sharpening. "If you're here to claim the moral high ground, maybe we should talk about how your companies treat workers, about how you flirt with conspiracy, or how you wield your platforms like weapons." There it was, his counterstrike. The audience reacted, some clapping, others murmuring in agreement. For a moment Colbert looked like his old self again, righteous, poised, armed with facts. But Musk's expression didn't change. He leaned in slightly and said with surgical calm, "That's the oldest trick in the book. Deflect the message by attacking the messenger. But let me ask you this, Stephen. If I'm so dangerous, why do you keep inviting me back?" Colbert froze. It was a question not meant to be answered, only absorbed. Because the truth was undeniable. The spectacle sold. The confrontation drew ratings. And in that instant, everyone watching felt the hypocrisy lay bare. Not just in the words spoken, but in the machinery behind them. Still, Colbert pressed on. He had to. He couldn't allow the narrative to escape him entirely. "You talk about truth, but you have billions of dollars and entire platforms to shape the world how you see fit. How are you any different from the people you criticize?" "A fair point." The audience responded with thoughtful silence. But Musk, unmoved, replied, "The difference is, I build things. I don't just mock them from the safety of a monologue." And suddenly the jab landed not only on Colbert, but on everyone in the room who had grown too comfortable laughing at the world's failures without lifting a hand to change them. The tension thickened. A crew member offstage gestured subtly to Colbert, trying to signal a commercial break. He ignored it. He wasn't ready to end this. "Not yet." "Is that really what you think I do?" Colbert asked, his voice lower now, more vulnerable. "You think I just mock the world and hide?" Musk paused. For the first time he looked at Colbert, not as an adversary but as a man. "I think you used to fight. I think you used to stand for something bigger than applause. But somewhere along the way the performance became the purpose. It was not cruel. It was not gloating. It was just quiet truth. And that made it unbearable. The studio lights didn't flicker. The cameras didn't cut. But something real was happening, and no one wanted to look away. Viewers at home began recording the segment, posting clips online within seconds. It wasn't just going viral. It was igniting something. Colbert sat still. The cards were forgotten now, his show outline crumpled between his fingers. And for a heartbeat he didn't speak. Because Musk had said what no one dared to say. Not to his face, not on this stage, not with millions watching. And for the first time in years, Stephen Colbert didn't have a comeback. The studio had grown colder, not physically, but emotionally. The warmth of late-night laughter, the cozy rhythm of jokes and applause had evaporated. In its place was a raw, exposed silence, one that clung to the walls, the audience, and most of all, to Stephen Colbert. The cameras kept rolling, but the mask had slipped. The performance had fractured. Stephen sat hunched slightly, eyes fixed not on Musk, but on the floor in front of him. It wasn't embarrassment. It was calculation. He was trying to find a way back, a way to reassert control without admitting how much of it he had already lost. But Musk wasn't finished. "You know what bothers me the most?" he said softly, breaking the silence like a scalpel. "It's not that you disagree with me. It's that you pretend disagreement is dangerous. You create an illusion that questioning the narrative is heresy, that if someone thinks differently, they must be villainous or unstable. How did we get here?" The question wasn't rhetorical. Not this time. It hung in the air like a challenge to everyone watching. At home, on social media, in the studio. When had honest disagreement become a threat? When had television stopped allowing discomfort? Wasn't this the medium once used to question wars, challenge presidents, and expose corruption? And now it felt like theater, a place where nothing truly unexpected was allowed to survive. Colbert looked up slowly. His voice, when it returned, was quieter than before. "So you think I'm part of a machine, a puppet for some greater agenda? Do you really believe that's who I am?" Musk didn't answer right away. He studied Colbert, perhaps weighing his next words not for effect, but for accuracy. And then he said, "I think you're better than that, but I also think comfort has a way of dulling the edge, and your edge was once the sharpest on television." Wasn't an attack. It was a lament. The audience felt it too. This wasn't about scoring points. It was about something deeper. Disappointment. The kind that only stings when it comes from someone who expected more. Colbert exhaled, and for the first time, dropped the last traces of the host persona. "You know," he said, "I used to watch the news with my father. He taught me to question everything, to never accept easy answers. Maybe somewhere along the way I started giving them instead." Musk nodded. There was no glee in his eyes, no smugness, just gravity. He had pushed, but he had not tried to destroy. What emerged wasn't a broken man, but a man forced to confront the role he had grown into without realizing what he had left behind. Colbert turned to the audience, his voice steadier now, but raw. "Maybe we all did. Maybe this whole business of entertainment has dulled our courage. Maybe we've made safety more important than truth." There was no applause. Just quiet stillness. It was no longer a debate. It had evolved or devolved into something more profound. A reckoning, not just between two men, but between a system and its soul. Musk finally broke the silence. "The truth isn't safe. It never was. That's why it matters." Colbert stared at him, and for a brief moment, the mask of late-night television slipped entirely. The walls between audience and performer, between joke and judgment, crumbled. And then, Colbert stood, not storming off, not collapsing, just rising, quietly. The crew froze, cameras adjusted. The producers whispered behind the glass. He walked to the edge of the stage, not toward Musk, but toward the crowd. "I've sat behind that desk for over a decade," he said, "and I've laughed, and I've argued, and I've tried to walk the line between truth and entertainment. But tonight I realized I might have strayed too far from what I once believed in." It was not a breakdown. It was not a retreat. It was an awakening. And Musk, still seated, simply watched. He had not won anything. This was not victory. It was something far more uncomfortable. He had opened a wound that could not be closed with applause. "Maybe," Colbert added, "the real question is not what Elon Musk came here to say, but why it took this long for someone to say it." The studio remained hushed. No one moved. No one spoke. And yet everyone knew. They had witnessed. Something real. In the control room, the producers hovered like ghosts. Hands on headsets, eyes flicking between monitors, they whispered urgently but gave no orders. How could they? The show had escaped the script, drifted beyond format, beyond marketing, beyond the engineered laughter. What was happening on that stage wasn't television anymore. It was something messier, truer, and no one dared to cut away. Stephen Colbert remained standing, one hand resting on the edge of his desk, not for drama, but for balance. He had just spoken the most unscripted truth of his career, and it landed like a wave, quiet, powerful, and irreversible. The audience stayed silent, not because they were unsure how to react, but because they didn't want to miss what might come next. Musk stood too, slowly. Not to match Colbert's energy, not to assert dominance, but because something in the air had shifted. The tension that once drove their exchange had softened into something more delicate. Recognition, not of agreement, but of shared discontent. Two men, forged in entirely different worlds, now faced the same question. What happens when the roles you built start to suffocate you? You didn't have to say that, Musk said. His voice was even, but there was a note of respect in it. Most people wouldn't. Not here, not now. Colbert turned to him. His reply was simple. Maybe that's why it had to be said here. And with those words, the dam broke. Not with tears, not with shouting, but with a flood of vulnerability that no network segment had room to contain. Musk stepped forward, his tone shifting from confrontational to curious. Do you ever wonder if the machine outgrew the people who built it? Colbert nodded quietly. Every day, but we feed it anyway. The audience began to murmur, not with confusion, but with realization. This wasn't a moment they could laugh off or forget in the morning. This was one of those rare breaks in the cultural timeline, where entertainment peeled back its polished skin and showed something raw beneath. Musk spoke again, but slower now. You asked earlier if I think you're part of a machine. I don't. I think you were once the one challenging it. But somewhere, they made you the face of it. Colbert didn't flinch at the accusation anymore. He simply accepted it. That was the hardest truth of all. Not that someone had confronted him, but that the confrontation had echoed something he already knew. A producer stepped onto the edge of the stage, whispering urgently, "We're way over time. We have to wrap." Colbert raised a hand gently. No, not yet. He turned to the audience, this time with a different kind of energy. Tonight was supposed to be a segment, a routine. But if all I ever do is return to routine, then maybe I've failed to be the person this platform needs. Not just someone who makes people laugh, but someone who reminds them why they should care. And then, to the astonishment of everyone, he extended a hand toward Musk. Elon, I don't agree with everything you've said, but I know honesty when I see it, and I owe you something for bringing it here. Musk shook his hand. It wasn't performative. It was two men acknowledging that they had entered this conversation from opposite ends, and somewhere in the chaos found a place to meet. But the moment wasn't about forgiveness. It was about accountability. That handshake wasn't the ending, it was the challenge. Colbert turned back to the camera, his voice now completely devoid of performance. To those watching, I've made a career out of laughter, and I hope I still do. But maybe it's time I also make room for truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. No cue cards, no teleprompter. Just a man and a lens. Musk, standing beside him, added one last thought. We don't need to agree to move forward. We just need to be brave enough to ask the questions. And for the first time in perhaps the show's history, the credits didn't roll. The screen didn't fade to black because no one dared interrupt what had become more than a debate. It had become a reckoning. The following morning, headlines exploded across the internet, each vying for the most sensational version of what had just happened on late-night television. Elon Musk dismantles. Colbert's persona One read, Stephen Colbert faces brutal truths. On his own stage, another claimed. But the reality defied every headline. It wasn't about dismantling. It wasn't even about winning. It was about what was built from the ruins of certainty. Clips of the exchange flooded social media platforms. People didn't just share the confrontation. They lingered on the silence, the reflection, the crack in the surface where vulnerability poured through. Some praised Colbert for his humility. Others mocked his hesitation. Some saw Musk as a provocateur finally unchecked. Others called him a bully cloaked in intellect. But amidst the noise, one thing became clear. Something real had occurred. And in an age ruled by performance, reality is the rarest form of courage. Back in the studio, Colbert entered the writer's room with a calm that stunned his team. There was no debrief, no sarcasm, no finger-pointing. Just a stillness in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. "Let's rewrite next week's monologue," he said. "Start with the truth. Build the jokes after." It was a small statement. But in television, small changes signal revolutions. As for Musk, he didn't gloat. He didn't post a thread or an op-ed. He didn't need to. His message had landed, not as a grenade but as a mirror. He had thrown no insults, only questions. And those questions now lived in the minds of millions. Do we still want honest disagreement, or just pleasing confirmation? Have our conversations become games of optics, or are they still capable of growth? That night, Colbert opened his next show in a way no one expected. He stood alone on the stage. No band, no lights, no applause. Just him and the camera. "I've spent a lot of years behind that desk," he began, voice steady. "But last night reminded me why I sat there in the first place. Not just to entertain, but to engage. Not just to criticize, but to question. Not just to be funny, but to be honest." And then, in a moment that would be replayed thousands of times, he stepped out from behind the desk and sat on the edge of the stage. "I'm not going to pretend I agreed with everything Elon said, but I respect that he said it. And I respect that I heard it. That we all heard it." He paused, then added with a wry smile, "If you came here tonight expecting more fireworks, I'm sorry to disappoint. There's no feud, no scandal, no walkout. Just a host who remembered that truth doesn't always come wrapped in applause." The audience was quiet, but it wasn't discomfort this time. It was awe, because in a media world addicted to friction, Colbert had chosen reflection, and it didn't stop there. Over the coming weeks, the show changed. Subtly at first, monologues became more grounded. Interviews went deeper. The laughter remained, but it was no longer a shield. It was a tool, used to connect, not to deflect. Musk continued his work outside the television bubble, but the ripples of that single night followed him. In future interviews, journalists no longer treated him like a caricature. They listened. More, challenged better. A standard had been reset, not by force, but by example. And the viewers, those millions at home, felt it too. They didn't just consume the story. They discussed it, debated it. Some with their families, others with complete strangers online. They argued not to destroy, but to understand. Because when two public figures risk their comfort zones on national television, it gives everyone else permission to do the same. In the end, it wasn't about Musk or Colbert. It was about the possibility of dialogue in a world that too often replaces speech with sound bites. One episode, one stage, two men with everything to lose and no reason to pretend. No one had expected a debate. And yet, what unfolded was something deeper. A rare collision between power and vulnerability, between confrontation and growth, between television and truth. And for once, nobody wanted it to end.